Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Mama Project podcast. Today, I am having a special guest for an interview. I have Autumn Fowler with the Nest Counseling. I found Autumn probably on a reel, to be honest, on Instagram, speaking to how parenthood impacts relationships. So, that is what we are going to be talking about today. So, Autumn, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so before we get into today's topic and discussion, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I am a wife and a mama to two little boys and one crazy Australian Shepherd. And I have a couple businesses. I have my practice for my clinical counseling. I do a lot of couples marriage therapy in there, and then I offer relationship coaching as well through my wellness business. So I'm coaching couples and individuals on how to prepare for parenthood and how to be as strong as they can be. And I've been doing that since I became a mom myself, which was 2019.
Awesome, awesome. And I know you have some online programs as well, and we can speak to those, at the end. But talk to us a little bit about that first topic of how couples can prepare their relationship for parenthood.
Right. I mean, it feels like a big question, but I guess it's really somewhat straightforward because so many people, when they learn that they're expecting a new baby, they jump to, well, I gotta get the nursery ready. I gotta get the right stroller, the right car seat, make freezer meals and icicle pads and all the things. Um, and then the baby comes and their relationship is thrown for a loop, and maybe there are unique challenges that crop up and we haven't thought about those things. So what I'm supporting parents to prepare for is how to feel like a team when they enter parenthood and how to manage different challenges that might arise as a unit instead of feeling like you're handling it on your own or you're blindsided by the different challenges that might show up. That might be things like supporting couples to come up with a solid sleep plan and a couple ideas for how both partners are going to get like solid chunks of sleep for the first year postpartum. How to recognize different symptoms of mood disorders and how to support your partner if you're noticing any of those symptoms arise, how to set loving boundaries with family members during the fourth trimester and beyond, how to communicate with your partner when you're sleep deprived and it's 2 a.m. and you kind of want to suffocate them with a pillow while they're snoring next to you, how to maintain and refine intimacy postpartum. So we're looking at different categories of relational wellness and ensuring that the relationship is prepared to handle different challenges that might arise when the baby comes.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about right before I hit record was that just that element that you talked about was that everybody prepares for the baby, but you don't really think about the impact of how it's going to influence your relationship as a couple,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
So what are the common struggles that couples face when they become parents?
One of the biggest ones that I notice is resentment starts to build due to a perceived lack of fairness between partners. And and really, I think what's talked about a lot in the media right now is this idea of the mental load or invisible labor. Um, but what I see in my work is that this goes both ways. So, if we're talking about a traditional heterosexual couple, the mom might feel like there's there's an inequality in all of the invisible labor that they're taking on in their new role as a mother. They might feel like, now there's also more visible labor, right? Breastfeeding and actually having a baby on your hip all the time. But the husband might be feeling like, well, I'm also resenting the fact that I don't have the same freedom that I have anymore, that I'm not getting the same level of attention and care from my partner that I was before, that I'm not being recognized and acknowledged for the efforts that I am putting in to the family unit. And so there's this sense that both partners feel like they're not getting their needs met. Both partners feel like the other one isn't showing up for them in the way that they need, but there's a disconnect in the way that they communicate about that and how they work through that. And what I see often is by the time I start working with couples, is they've been feeling this way for months and months and months, and that resentment has been growing silently, and now it's eroding the quality of the relationship.
What can couples do early on if they're starting to feel this way? And maybe they just feel like, oh, this is normal, like when you become a parent, right? Like roles change and different tasks change, right? Like you said, the mental load. And so I think a lot of couples think, well, this is just normal. This is just a normal part of parenthood. And a lot of couples, even friends of mine, talk about, like, yeah, we're totally in the roommate phase. Like,
Mm,
we're just roommates. And they all are like, that's normal. But what can couples do when they're feeling that initially?
mhm. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that it is normal. It is normal to feel like you're in a season where maybe like your sexual intimacy is not at the forefront of your priorities. You've entered a new stage and a new chapter in your relationship journey where your own personal desire and pleasure is not your number one priority, or you don't have the capacity for it. And so that's the first step. And then the second step is checking in with yourself about whether or not you're okay with that. If both partners in the relationship are like, yeah, we're in the roommate phase and this is where we are right now, and that feels really okay, we're content with that, great. Like, great. As long as there's still love and fondness and admiration and friendship, you'll be fine. But if one or both partners are feeling like we're in the roommate phase and it feels bad, I feel disconnected. I actually low key kind of hate my spouse. I'm frustrated all the time. I don't really want to be near them. I don't want to be touched. Then that again is going to cause more challenges in the relationship and start to erode the quality and the satisfaction in the relationship over time.
What is something that couples can do to work through that like roommate phase if they're not feeling okay with it and they're like maybe not both of them, but maybe one of the couples is feeling disconnected. Maybe the mom was working and now she's decided to stay at home and realizing that that's really hard. It's not, I mean, even if you decide to leave the workforce and spend more time at home, it's not like it's not work. It's just it's different work. So how can couples navigate that if the roommate phase isn't feeling good?
Mhm. Good question. Um, there's a lot they can do. So, first of all, acknowledging that there are different forms of intimacy, and at the very foundational level, we want to feel like there's an emotional connection in order for there to be a physical connection. So, when I think roommate phase, I think um, we're barely friends and there's definitely no sexual intimacy or physical intimacy. And what I would want is for them to first take it up to like, let's be friends. Let's have a level of intimacy with our conversation, um, with our connection on a day-to-day basis, how we're spending time together. Can we inject more play and levity and lightness into our interaction so that we're feeling like we're not just roommates? Can we sit on the same couch and maybe our bodies touch in some way, even if that's just like feet on top of each other or holding hands? Can we start to build up more closeness? And then, of course, after that, it's looking at, do we want to re-engage in more sexual ways? Are we wanting to increase physical intimacy and different ways to do that? I mean, there's so many different ways to do that, but acknowledging that we need that emotional foundation first before we can enter into um, a more physical realm of the relationship.
Let's talk about intimacy a little bit. I like that you touched on that because I think that a lot of couples, maybe even myself included, feel pressure to return to a sexual relationship with their partner. And, I know depending on your experience with childbirth, depending on the severity, depending on if there was it's when you get cleared at 6 weeks, like you may not feel good or ready.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I know I was not. I was like, no way. Like, there's not a chance. So I feel like couples, at least women, maybe not the men, but maybe the women feel like pressure to return to that sexual relationship and they're just not ready. So how do you navigate that with couples? And is that common as well?
Yes. Yes. I think that there is, like before parenthood, the idea of, okay, well, you won't be able to engage in any kind of sexual intimacy for 6 weeks. I think when you're entering that, there's this light at the end of that 6 weeks of like, of course we will re-engage in sexual intimacy at that time. Of course we will. And then maybe as you, especially if you're a birthing parent, you give birth, maybe there's birth trauma, maybe there's physical trauma to the body, maybe there's more injury that you're having to work through, like all these other factors. Now you're sleep deprived. The reality of that 6 weeks feels, for I think the majority of women, not all women, pretty unattainable. And so there's this pressure of like, well, aren't we supposed to want to have sex? Aren't we supposed to want to be intimate with our partner? And what does it say about me or my relationship if I don't? Right. So there can be this doubt that plants a seed, or this shame of like, is there something wrong with my relationship that we aren't being sexually active in this period of time in our life? Um, so yes, to answer your question, yes, I think it's really normal to experience that pressure. And I think that when we're wanting to re-engage in a sexual way, if that's something that we're wanting to do or one person is wanting to do, we have to be gentle with ourselves about the pace of that. 6 weeks, in my opinion, is crazy. Really, what they're saying is maybe you're medically cleared, but that doesn't mean you're psychologically cleared. That doesn't mean that you're sexually cleared, right? They're just saying, there would pose no injury to your health to engage with this again. And you don't have to listen to that as if it's gospel. We can make our own decisions as a unique couple about what feels good for us. And actual intercourse might be a year down the road. But are there other areas of physical intimacy that would feel good, that would feel pleasurable? And that might even just be like a back massage or um, laying together in bed and cuddling. Like let's slowly work up to this again, because your body's been through a lot and we don't need to rush anything that doesn't feel good just for the sake of saying that we did so.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying too about the should. Like, oh my gosh, we should want to have sex. Like, we should be having sex regularly. I don't know why. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if like, where does that come from? That should, in terms of sexual expectations. Like, is it media? Is it culture? Like, what is it about like our relationships, our intimate relationship with our partner, thinking that taking a break from sex is shameful?
Mm.
Because I know a lot of moms that just their libido sucks postpartum. It just sucks. So,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, like the shame about I just don't want to, and that being normal, because I don't think that's something that's talked about often.
Mhm. Well, there's so much going on for a woman's body postpartum, right? So we've got hormones in the mix. If you're at home as the primary caregiver, you're likely feeling that level of like touched out or exhaustion from just having a little creature that you're caring for all the time and likely having very little time to care for yourself. And what we know can happen when we're in that kind of a vortex of we've got physical hormones, we're feeling touched out, we have no time to care for ourselves. Psychologically, it's really hard to experience desire. And desire is a different word that we could use for libido. So that idea of like, do I want to have sex? Right? Do I desire this? Well, likely not. If you're not sleeping, you haven't showered, you're barely getting a decent meal in per day, you're wearing like old clothes with a tiny human's bodily fluids all over, like you don't feel sexy. So you don't really want to do this. But there's all of this messaging that healthy relationships have great sex lives. And I think there's a lot of comparison that happens. And I honestly believe that between friends, there's not always a lot of honesty about how often or frequent they're having sex. People can get really hung up on this idea of like the right amount, the right frequency of sex. Um, and so yeah, you're just like all this pressure of I should be, I should be, I should be. You're getting all this messaging from peers, from TV shows, from media, and really it's your relationship. Does it feel good for you? If the answer is no, it's absolutely okay to say that you need to take a break. I will put a caveat in there that if you're in a place where you would like to want to have sex, but you don't want to have sex. There's things that you can do to increase your feelings of desire, so that you actually want to engage in this world again. You don't have to just accept forever, right? That, oh, well, my libido just sucks postpartum. And so this is just going to be the way it is for years now.
What are some of those? Can you give a couple of examples? Some of those things that you can do if you want to like you don't want to have sex, but you want to have sex.
Mhm, mhm. So there's a couple things you can do, but I think one of the easiest ones for people to wrap their head around is there's this concept that an amazing sex researcher, Emily Nagoski, coined, and she refers to it as our brakes and our accelerators. So when it comes to sex, we always have two things happening at once. We have things that are turning us on, right? Think of that as the accelerator or the gas pedal in the car. But we also have things that are turning us off. So the brakes in the car. And we can have both feet on both pedals at the same time. And if that's happening, just like with a car, your car is not really going to go anywhere very fast, even if you have so many things that are turning you on. If the brakes are fully on, the car's not moving or it's not moving very fast. Um, so identifying for yourself what breaks are happening in your life. What are the things that turn you off that are going to make it impossible for you to be in the mood to want to have sex? And how can you reduce those? Right? It's not just about figuring out what turns you on, it's also about figuring out what turns you off and reducing those.
One of the things you talked about was about frequency,
Mhm.
like how many times a week, a month is like
Mhm.
healthy.
Yeah.
What is realistic for couples? Like what do you see? I don't even know what's normal or what's average. For me it's like yeah, once a week sounds like it should like you should have it. It should be at least once a week, twice a week, like three times a week. Like what is healthy frequency or realistic expectations for new parents?
Yeah. I really push against this idea that there's a certain frequency that is healthy. I don't think it's true. I think every couple is different and it is based on what feels good for you. And each person in the relationship is going to be different, right? So we are all we are all human beings with the same parts made up in different ways. So we're all, that's what Emily Nagoski says, right? We all are sexual beings, but we're going to want to have sex or enjoy sex in different ways, which means that there is not a normal. Does it feel good for you? Great, you're normal. If it doesn't feel good for you, then that's normal for you. There's no right amount. And I think that striving for that is only going to create shame in any given relationship. So figure out what feels good for you. And maybe instead of focusing on frequency, focus on pleasure. How good was the sex? Did it feel good for you? Do more of that. If it didn't feel good for you, you're probably not going to want to do more of that. So figure out what does feel good for you.
Do you feel like this topic of like intimacy and sex is like one of the things that couples struggle with the most postpartum, or is there something else that
Mm.
takes precedent?
I think it's something that couples struggle with a lot, but it's not usually the reason that couples come through the door. It's not the first thing we talk about. It's like the third thing we talk about. It's an issue and it's there, but what I find is, like I said, if you want to, a lot of women will say, well, I don't want to. I don't want to have sex because I actually am so frustrated and so resentful and I feel so alone in this relationship where I feel so exhausted and sleep deprived. Like there's other things that need to be addressed usually first for us to even get to the point of that being a possibility. The number one thing that couples come in for is the feeling of resentment around unfair division of labor, visible and invisible in the household and parenting, and communication and conflict, which is true whether you are a parent or child free. That's one of the biggest things that couples are struggling with is how do they speak to one another?
It's almost like they need to work on the emotional connection and communication to
Mhm.
even have a sexual relationship,
Yes.
right?
I
It's
think
like,
for most people that's true. For most women that's true. And so therefore for most heterosexual relationships that's true.
absolutely. So let's change gears a little bit and talk about boundaries with family members and what that can look like in parenthood.
For sure. Um, so one of the big things that comes up usually in the fourth trimester or maybe the third trimester is this anxiety and conflict with family members about their level of involvement in the newborn baby's life and the family unit's life. And so that can manifest in a lot of conflict between the couple if there's differing maybe ideas about what they want that involvement to look like, or maybe they are on the same page, but it's really hard to communicate those needs and those desires to the family members, or maybe they've communicated them, but it's hard to maintain the boundary if it's not respected. And so that can be something that we spend quite a bit of time talking about is figuring out what you want the level of involvement to look like, how to communicate it, and what to do if it isn't respected, and how to maintain your boundary if other people aren't going to respect it out of the gate.
Okay. I wanted to move on to some Q&A that I had for my Instagram next, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, that's it.
So, one of the questions was about date nights. You know,
Hmm.
we've seen the importance of date nights, and I've talked to, clients of mine that's like, we've had maybe two date nights in the past 3 years. So, how important are date nights and spending quality time with your spouse?
Mhm. Spending quality time with your spouse is extremely important. And I think that in the season of parenthood, we have to redefine what a date night looks like in order to be successful. What I mean by that is it's not so much about having these like elaborate nights out, getting dressed up, having a fancy dinner, going, I don't know, to an event, whatever it is you like to do, but it's about filling our relationship bank account with positive interactions. And it's about having a level of play and levity between the spouses. So I really encourage couples, especially with young kids, to be having date nights at home as much as possible. And I've got so many ideas splattered all over my Instagram as well as free guides on how to implement that. Um, then I would encourage them to consider what would it look like to have a family date? So you're going to go on a date and you're going to be with your kids and it's going to be chaotic and there's going to be a tantrum or a meltdown or a nap that interrupts the schedule or whatever. But can you be intentional about how you're going to show up for each other as a couple during that time? Can you steal a kiss? Can you hold hands? Can you have a giggle about the chaos of your life while you're in it? Things that are going to help you to feel like you're not alone just doing the thing side by side, but you're actually in it together. And then lastly, it doesn't need to be a full-on date to fill your relationship tank. You can have a 60-second hug or a 30-second hug or a 6-second kiss. You can have 10 minutes of playing a board game together, 5 minutes of intentional conversation with your devices put down. Um, there are things that you can do for one another, little rituals throughout the day, sending a text with gratitude at your lunch break that are going to increase your level of overall connection and maintain that relationship satisfaction.
I was going to have a follow-up question, but you kind of answered it within that question was about couples that don't have a lot of support,
Mhm.
with childcare. How do they get out for date nights? So I really like what you said about redefining what a date night is and just having date nights at home because for a lot of couples that don't have support, maybe they don't live near family and they don't have reliable babysitters or whatever the case may be, they just they think that they cannot have date nights.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about like redefining what a date night looks like in this current season. So my next question would be how do you talk to your partner? So this is coming from a mom. How do you talk to your partner about wanting some individual time? Like a mom wanting some time alone to have some self-care, whether that's, going to get a workout in or maybe getting a pedicure or something. Like how do you talk to a spouse about giving a mom some of that time to herself and the importance of that?
Hmm. When I hear that question, I'm curious about what the barrier is for that person in asking for what they need. And my guesses would be that either they experience their own level of like mom guilt, mom shame. I'm not supposed to want to have time away from my children or time to myself, or they really want that time to themselves, but they're worried that their partner won't be supportive about it. So the first question I would pose to that person would be, what's the barrier? Discover for yourself what that barrier is, because that will change what you're going to do. If it's mom guilt, um, there's probably some unlearning that needs to be done there around what does it mean to be a good mom? Where did those messages come from? How can you show up for your children in a way that you would want them to be proud of you for, that you would want them to grow up and be the same kind of mother or father? And if it's for because you're worried about your spouse not supporting you, this comes down to number one, identifying your needs, being able to communicate them clearly and advocate for yourself and holding boundaries with your spouse of this is what I need for me. And that might look like having to sacrifice other things that need to get done because taking care of yourself is actually a priority. So if it's working out, if it's saying like I really need to get some time in to go for a run or go to the gym, and I'm worried about asking my spouse to do that when he gets home from work because, dinner has to get made and the kids are going crazy and, he's had a long day too. Well, maybe you order takeout on that night and dinner's not getting made. Or maybe that's a crock pot meal kind of day. And maybe it's okay if the kids are all over dad when he walks in the door for that day in order for you to have 30, 60 minutes of time to yourself because you are going to walk back in the door and be a better parent afterwards. So communicating that to your spouse, this is what I need for me. And I'm sure you need time for yourself too, to not just be a dad or an employee. And how can we make sure that you're getting that time too? That can really help with buy-in for a spouse to make sure that there's some level of fairness happening there.
You touched on mom guilt, and that was actually the next question is how to get rid of mom guilt.
How to get rid of mom guilt. Oh,
The
it's a
age old
long conversation.
question.
Yeah. It's a big question. Therapy? No, there's so much unlearning that needs to be done. And I think our generation is already starting to unearth a lot of how we were raised to believe a good mom was. And now maybe we have like this dissonance, this conflicting information of, okay, so a good mom doesn't necessarily mean that I'm at home every hour that my kids are home, that I make every meal from scratch, that the house is always clean, because maybe that's what our mothers did or believed because that's how they were raised, right? So it's generational and it takes time to kind of unravel, untangle what of these expectations are my own and what of these have been passed down to me. And once we can identify those two things, we can have compassion for the things that have been passed down to us and also choose to do something different because we know that that is being passed down to the generation after us. And we know now how important it is for there to be some level of equality and fairness in a partnership, how important it is for our children to see us caring for our own well-being so that they will be raised to believe that it's important for them to not self-sacrifice everything for their own children.
Yeah, that's so true. It is different, right? I know my mom and that generation, they all stayed home full time. And so I do think you're right that some of that is definitely generational and passed down because we see how we were raised, and it's different now because more women are working and
Mhm.
wear many hats and play many roles in a day. And I think either way, though, I mean, at least I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. Whether it's a stay-at-home mom or a working mom, there's mom guilt in
Yes,
either role.
absolutely.
Okay, the next question is, what if you don't see eye to eye with your partner on a parenting decision for your child, like a big parenting decision? How do you navigate that?
Mhm. This is such a hot button topic in the programs that I run, and one that is so important to feel confident that you can tackle as a team because you are absolutely not going to agree on everything. It's just like very, very rare that a couple is going to see eye to eye on absolutely every decision and every moment. So I think, first of all, without having a specific instance in mind, I'll just create my own. Let's say you see differently about how to manage big feelings in the household, right? So, what your parenting style is going to be in response to tantrums. And one partner wants to take more of a disciplinary role, more like power and control. It's not okay for you to have big feelings and be punching the walls and hitting your brother and, making a scene in public. And the other parent wants to take more of this gentle parenting approach, which has become quite popular, and give a lot of space for validation and allowing those feelings to come out okay. And so now they're in conflict because these are quite opposite ideas. So we want to start by acknowledging that there's going to be one parent that is probably going to feel more triggered by the child's behavior, by this tantrum, than the other. Once we acknowledge who that parent is, right? Let's say it's parent A, because this belief that we want to shut down the big feelings. So when the feelings are there, it's very triggering for them. So we might decide, well, parent B is likely going to be more equipped to have patience for the tantrum in the moment, and parent A can maybe take on a different role. Maybe that's caring for the other child. Maybe that's going for a walk around the block in order to regulate their own nervous system. Maybe that's gathering all of their things, and if they're at a public event, in the case that they do need to leave. And they come up with a plan ahead of time of who is going to do what, and then they debrief afterwards about how it's going to go. They come up with a plan A, they come up with a plan B, they follow through with it, things go sideways, they readjust, and then you reset your expectations for how you're going to handle it the next time going into the same event.
That was a good example because I think that is definitely a thing. Even my husband and he was like, "What do you mean there's no timeouts?" Or "What do you mean?" Because I've read more about gentle parenting and listening to podcast episodes about it. And, it's not like there's not discipline, like there's a difference, right? It's not like discipline and punishment, I feel like, is different. So I like that example a lot. Okay, let's see. What else do I have here for you? Okay, I lost my place. Talked about date nights, making time for self care, getting rid of mom guilt when you don't see eye to eye. What about the division of labor? So we have some moms that are stay at home moms. You have some moms that are working moms, but how do you work with your clients on the division of labor, even if one of the parents is it different? Like, do you see that it's different with stay at home moms versus working moms and the division of labor? Because maybe, if the mom stays home, the husband feels like, well, that's her role, is to stay home and to do the household chores, the cooking, the cleaning, and everything like that. But when the mom is working, it needs to be shared. Or is it all shared, no matter who's working outside of the home or not?
So again, every couple is going to be unique, and it's what feels good to you. So division of labor isn't about equality, it's about fairness. We want to feel like things feel fair in our relationship the way that things are right now. And different seasons of life will bring change where whatever feels fair now might not feel fair a year from now, 5 years from now, as your children grow and as your family moves through these different stages and different needs of the different types of labor that are required. So getting clear with yourself about whether or not things are feeling fair right now for you. If they are, great. If they're not, then really making a list of all of the visible and invisible types of labor that need to be completed in order for you to run a household and parent your children. Examples of this might be like taking out the garbage, grocery shopping, right? These are visible laundry things we need to do. But then there's also waking up with your children in the middle of the night and putting them back to sleep, or managing emotional distress and dysregulation with your children throughout the day, or making doctor's appointments, buying the birthday gift for the family member and making sure it gets in the mail in order to arrive to them before their birthday, right? Like there are all these things that are happening maybe behind the scenes, more invisible labor. So making a list of all of that and then divvying it up in a way that feels fair to both partners. And that might look like 80-20, and that feels fair in your relationship. Or maybe it's going to be more 60-40, 50-50, and that's what feels fair. So figure out what feels fair for both of you and then check in with each other about it as you go. Is this still working for us? Do we need to redistribute who's doing what? Um, Constantly coming back to this idea of you're a team and you get to decide how you run your household as a team instead of one person is just in charge of everything and needs to figure it out on their own.
Absolutely. Now, so this is just a question for me. When do you see that clients seek counseling the most? Like when the problem is just exploded and it's like, they are really having issues communicating, or at the beginning, or do you see a mix of both? Like when do you feel like people really need to seek out counseling the most?
When do people need to seek it out, or when do people typically seek it out?
Both. Yeah, yeah, they're two questions, so both.
Well, research tells us that couples come to counseling about 6 years after the first time they started talking about it. In my experience, it's maybe not quite that long in the season of life that I focus in because it's such an acute time. Um, but it's because it's an acute time of stress, things are often quite explosive or eroded by the time that I'm seeing couples, even if that's only 6 or 8 months postpartum. But I would say couples probably need to be coming in and seeing a counselor or seeking some kind of outside support in that fourth trimester up to first year for sure. Just touch base, go through all the things that I've gone through on this podcast for your unique situation, ensure you're on the same page, work out any kinks. And then if you're having multiple children or your children grow, you'll likely need some more support. Um, like a hot time I see is when parents have had 2 kids 2 years apart. The like 1 and 3 is really tough, that kind of time frame. So probably again seeking support there to redefine everything you've already figured out, making sure you're on the same page, and also just some normalization and validation that like this is a hard season of life. And you're likely going to need some additional support, and where can you find that?
I think that there has been some stigma around therapy and counseling, especially for relationships, because it just means that you have a problem. There's a little bit of, stigma surrounding that. How can couples work past that? Like they think like, oh, this is just normal. This is a phase. Like we'll move past this. Like we're not like this won't affect us. We're going to be good. This is just what couples go through when they have a baby.
Mm, sorry, the question is, how do they work through stigma to attend therapy?
Correct.
Okay. Um, well, this comes down to this idea of unlearning the messaging that we've been given, right? Where did we learn that therapy isn't an okay choice of action, an okay choice of support. Um, I'm a firm believer that we all need help at some point in our lives, and help can look different. It can be help from a neighbor, help from a friend, help from a family member, or help from a professional. The difference being that therapy is actually such a um, beautiful place to be vulnerable with someone that doesn't know you at all. That is um, an unbiased third party that can hold space for your whole life story without really knowing any of the characters that are in it or your life circumstances up to this point, and can just hear you right now with what you're experiencing, and then have completely no judgment, no skin in the game, no agenda about the decisions that you make, and support you in doing what's best for you and your relationship right now. I feel like that's something that you can't have anywhere else in life. Because usually, if we're going to share this with anyone, it's probably the people that are closest to us, that have the most skin in the game, that are totally going to have an agenda for the decisions that you make and some big opinions and judgments about what you're choosing to do. So in some ways, even though it's vulnerable, it's also sometimes safer to share with someone that doesn't know you.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. So what is, just to wrap it all up, what is some advice that you can get for couples who are preparing for parenthood, and then maybe couples who are in the trenches of parenthood with little kids?
Mhm. My advice for those that are preparing for parenthood is think about how much time and money and energy you are investing into preparing for the birth and the like first couple weeks with your child, and consider how much time, money, and energy you are preparing for your relationship to have a solid foundation for the rest of your child's life. And if those two aren't anywhere near each other, you might need to increase how much you're preparing your relationship if you care to have a solid relationship foundation, which I'm sure if you've listened this far in this episode, you do. And for those who are in the trenches of parenthood, my advice would be seek support, ask for help. There is so much out there. You're not alone. This is such a hard period of time on relationships. It's possibly the hardest transition you will go through in your individual lives and your relationship. So don't take it lightly that this is hard. It's okay to be struggling, and it's okay to access support.
Absolutely. It's nice to know that people like you exist. So where can the listeners find you and the work that you do?
Listeners can find me at Instagram, or on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most, at the Nest Counseling with two L's. In Canada, there's two L's and then an underscore at the end. So at the Nest Counseling underscore. My website is nestcounseling.ca and autumnfowler.com. And for all of the listeners, I'd like to offer a discount code for 10% off, and it will be Mama Project 10.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Autumn, for being here and for your time today.
Of course, it was my pleasure.